thank you, Bijan Khalili and Sherkat Kitab, for hosting this event. It's really a great turnout. Thanks, everyone, for coming. And thanks, Chris from C-SPAN, who's filming and who's our audio expert, too. Well, as Bijan said, I'm half Iranian and half American, and I lived in Iran until the revolution. Probably would have lived there much longer. My parents were planning on staying there, and we left Iran really on vacation during the revolution. We came here and still haven't gone back until I was 26, and I went back myself, which was 5 years ago. So the book covers that time, starting actually from before I was born and ending with my trip to Iran 5 years ago. I've been back 4 times in the last 5 years, and it's changed a lot in those years, so I'm sure a lot of you have been back too, and we can talk about that afterwards. Can everyone hear me? Good, good. There are 2 seats here, which someone should sit in. And if anyone also, wants to sit here, I know it's hard to stand the whole time, but there's space on the sides. The first part is taking place right when the revolution is getting started. And it hasn't really affected our lives yet that much, although we have noticed things going on. We've heard gunshots outside in the street. We've seen protesters, but we haven't really related that to something that could affect us directly. And this is the first day that it really starts to. So it starts in our school. I went to an international school called Community School with my brother, whose name is Ali, and he's in this section. And also my sister's name is Sufi. And there's one Farsi word in here, which I'll translate for those of you who don't speak Farsi. It's shulughi. And it means, it really means messiness and disorder. And it was used at that time in late 1978 to describe the events that were going on, to describe the unrest in the streets. No one called it a revolution yet. It was just considered to be, what was going on, protests, demonstrations. And we never really heard it described as a revolution until we left Iran. So this scene takes place when my brother and I are waiting to go home from school. Community School is the only international school I know of in South Tehran, far from where most foreigners live. It has high brick walls around it, and only the gatekeeper can decide who goes in or out. On the days we stay late, he sits with one hand on the radio and the other clutching the telephone receiver, trying to find out which neighborhoods are safe to drive through. Our bus, passing through the Tehran University area, is usually the last to leave, and we who ride it feel distinguished as we watch the others depart, knowing that we would be in danger if we went home. Bus 57 is leaving, our driver finally yells in a piercing voice. Allie and I and the other kids climb back into the bus to find the bags. Outside the gate, nightfall blurs the neighborhood. Lately, because of the shulughi, the ride home has taken an extra long time. 2 hours is normal during the evening rush, so the extra hour it takes now doesn't bother us much. Since it is too dark to read, someone wads up a piece of paper and we play soccer in the aisle. Our driver is a little bald man with a thick mustache. We call him Limuni, because after he told us he hated lemons, students started boarding the bus in the morning, holding out plump, juicy ones, eliciting dignified refusals, and warnings that the next person with a lemon would be ejected. But we like Limuni too much to believe him, and we know he likes us because he sometimes stops on the way home and buys us big pink boxes of gooey pastries, which we pass around as he maneuvers through the narrow streets to our homes. But tonight, no matter how much we beg for pastries, he tips his head up and clicks his tongue. No. Come on, we say. Please, it's late and we're hungry. Just this once. We'll never ask again. Not tonight, he says. We pout quietly in our seats, hoping he will change his mind. But he knows more than we do. The lights are off at the pastry shop, and the metal grate is pulled down. We look at it and drive on. A few blocks later, Limuni almost jumps out of his seat. Close the curtains, he yells. Get down! Usually if anything is ever going on, we crowd up around his seat to see it. But tonight, something in his voice makes us obey. We pull the curtains closed and put our heads down. The sounds of honking and yelling blare in from the street. We crouch down, thrilled when we see the flicker of fire through the red curtains. We hear people running back and forth, and then a smash, a storefront crashing into slivers, and I imagine the broken shards catching the firelight as they fall slowly, tinkling into little jewels on the pavement. The ride home lasts 4 hours. Limuni drops each child off, not at the end of the alley as usual, but in front of the doorstep. Finally, it is just me and Allie. Limuni turns around and gives us a long, worried look. I can't take you to your house, he says. It's right by the university. Okay, we say excitedly, eager to see what else will happen tonight. Where are we going? I'll take you to your cousin's. He turns the bus off its usual course and down a dark alleyway. Somehow, he knows where our cousins live. He pulls up to their door and makes us ring their bell to make sure they are home. Our father's cousin Amir sticks his head out the window and calls out a cheery hello. See you tomorrow, we say to Limuni, and he gives us a little smile and a wave as we run inside. But the next day, school is closed. It is closed the day after that for 2 whole weeks. Then it opens and we are happy to go back and see our friends and compare notes from the long holiday. More people are absent, but I don't count the empty desks anymore. Everyone says the shuluhi should be over soon. I get my free period back, and sitting under the trees in the courtyard, I run over the letters I had learned so I won't fall behind. A, S, D, F, J, K, L, and the E we'd just gotten to when school closed. The other teachers give us backlog homework, and I take home a tall stack of books for the weekend. But the next week when we call, they tell us not to come. And the next day they tell us not to come. And then, no matter how many times we call, no one answers. We start our own school. I am the teacher, and I keep meticulous records of Ali's and Sufi's grades. We listen to Carry On Wayward Son and Slip Sliding Away on the tapes from Mama's office. But we can't get any more tapes because Mama's office is closed too. So, in the afternoons, Mama, Sufi, Ali, and I pull on our coats and boots, hold hands, and walk down the street toward Tehran University. There have been protests there almost every day, and the start of classes is still delayed. But where we are walking, just a block away, all we see are the dry leaves fluttering down around us. Beige tanks sit at the boulevard intersections. Soldiers pop up from them like rabbits and train their large machine guns on us, turning to follow as we pass. Don't look up, don't change pace, don't give them a reason to notice us or stop us. We know these rules without saying them out loud. And yet, deep down, we don't really feel like targets. We are not the ones burning banks, spray painting Yankee Go Home on the walls, or throwing bottles at policemen. And we are not the Yankees either. We walk to the English bookstore. It just opened recently, and it is much closer to our house than the other English language bookstores. The aisles have a fresh print smell, and the children's section is neatly stacked with Tintin and Enid Blyton books, just in from England. The bookstore owner, a Lebanese man, has already told us how he closed his shop in Beirut when the war came there. Now, as we wander around his shop, he gazes at Mama with mournful eyes. Everyone said go to Tehran, he tells her. They did a business study and said Iran was the most stable country in the Middle East. We moved our whole operation over. I'm sure things will get better, Mama says comfortingly. That is what they said in Beirut, he says, raising his eyes sadly toward the newly painted ceiling. I get a book about dogs, which I choose over a book about 2 Swedish orphans that Mama says I can get next time. But when we go back a few days later, the metal shutters are down and the English bookshop sign is gone. Walking home, we stop to buy Sufi some tennis shoes. The salesman, a short middle-aged man with a worn brown sweater, gets down on his knees to tie her laces. After doing one shoe, he looks up at Mama. Are you American? He asks. A few days ago, when a sharp-voiced man on the street asked her that, Mama tipped her head up and clicked her tongue. No. Françaisien, she said, which means I'm French, and the man walked away. But we have bought shoes from this man before, and I think he's asked before if Mama is American. Yes, she says, gripping my hand a little more tightly, but my husband is Iranian. Aha, he says, not surprised. But do you support the people? Do you like Khomeini? Something in his face, an openness, an interestedness, says he is not judging. He just seems to want to find out. Well, I'm staying here, aren't I? Mama says. The shopkeeper raises his eyebrows and nods, contemplating this. But which is better, he asks excitedly, Iran or America? Mama doesn't hesitate. Iran, she says warmly. He nods his head again and murmurs, Iran is good. On any day before this, she would have said both were good. On any day before this, he would have argued. He would have told her how long he had been waiting for a telephone, how badly his son needed books, and how the school would not pay for them, how his children needed coats, and his family could not eat meat more than once a week. But now, he just hands Mama a bag with Sufi's new shoes in it, and as she reaches for the bag, he throws in a pair of Minnie Mouse socks for free. And that's the point at which the revolution really starts taking off. And for a while, a lot of people in my family are very into it and interested in it. And we actually go watch some demonstrations. And my grandmother comes out with us and brings milk out to the demonstrators. She says young people need milk. And then, and we figure, we'll just stay. My parents say that they're going to stay no matter what happens. And this, problem is kind of the government's problem and not our problem. Then after a couple of months, it does start to feel more dangerous, and people start coming to houses in the middle of the night and arresting people, and it's unclear always, why that is. And there's a lot of anti-American sentiment. Since my mother's American, my dad studied in America, they decide that it's a good time to go on vacation to LA. So we do. And we end up not coming back, not going back, and we end up buying a car and driving north on Highway 5 and just kind of wandering around for a few months before we settled down. And the next part I'm going to read takes place 15 years later when I've been living in the States. I've been living in the U.S. and I've kind of adjusted and adapted and started school and gone to college in the States. And so I live a very American life, but Iran is always in the back of my mind as this place where my childhood was, and I couldn't go back. So I've tried a little bit to go back. I've called the interest section. There's no embassy in the States, but there is an interest section in another embassy, so I've called them and tried to get a visa on my American passport, but they don't give you a visa if your father's Iranian. So at this point in the book, I'm working in Brussels, and there is an embassy there. So I go there and ask them what I can do. So I get the travel documents, and I go to Iran, and the people at the airport have no idea what they are. And so I'm kind of stuck. They start interviewing me, and it's 2 in the morning, and I haven't really spoken much Farsi for 15 years. And they finally say, well, how did you get through all these countries without a passport? And I said, well, I have an American passport. And they said, well, can we see it? And I give it to them, and they take it away. So I'm now at this point, I've been in Iran a few days, and I'm pretty worried because I don't have any passport, and I don't really know how to get one back. My uncle that I'm staying with, Zia, has been taking me to the passport office every day to help me get it. And I'm staying with him and my Aunt Massey. So this next scene takes place when we've just come home from the passport office again and haven't gotten it. My Aunt Massey sets out plates of chicken and French fries. Have some cold watermelon juice. Then she and Zia go into their room to nap. I walk through the cool, dark house, peering through the blinds. There are no people out in the midday heat. Just a Pink Floyd someone has sprayed in English onto the brick wall across the street. I crane my neck to look up at the buildings, and above them, the speck of an airplane is moving, far too high to be stopping in Iran. I think of my boyfriend in New York, waiting patiently for me to return. I have filled every inch of a blue airmail fold-out, but then I decide not to worry him with my long, tearful account of my arrival. And I don't want to write about how all I do here is drink tea and go to the passport office. What I really want to do right now is to get out of the house. But Zia has forbidden me to go out alone. Anywhere you want to go, he says, I or another relative will take you. So I flipped through the Lonely Planet book Mama sent me in Brussels, the only English-language travel guide to come out on Iran since the revolution. I read the section on Shiraz. I read the section on the Caspian Sea. My plans to travel around Iran seem ridiculous, alone. Finally, one day, when Zia goes to sleep after lunch, I pull on my coat and scarf. I'm going for a walk, I whisper. Wait, she says, I'll get my scarf and go with you. But I tell her that I need to be alone. I promise to be back in 45 minutes, and to my surprise, she nervously lets me go. I start off down a quiet street lined with modern apartment buildings. Walking alone in Tehran for the first time in 15 years, I feel as if I've been given the key to a locked garden. I want to talk to people, but hardly anyone else is out. The one woman I do see is loaded down with groceries and barely looks up as I pass. I walk cautiously, keeping an eye out for anyone who might tell me to pull my scarf forward or to put on some socks. I wait an unreasonably long time at curbs, letting all the cars whiz by before I venture out. But the drivers are no more reckless than they were when I was a child, and after going a few blocks, I start to remember the rhythm of Tehran traffic and the art of not getting hit. I dash across the street and duck into a little general store, and its odor of sour cheese and stale candy immediately takes me back to Ramazan, my own old corner store. In fact, the merchandise here is so familiar that I don't even need to look at it carefully. I know the unbleached paper notebooks whose stapled binding falls apart after a day. I know the Rooster brand chiclets that I have to be worked in the mouth before they become soft enough to chew. I smile when I see the little red and orange bags of Pofak cheese curls hanging along the wall like old friends. Back in the street, it feels perfectly natural to walk along the trickling Jube underneath the dusty plane trees, and yet I get a rush each time I turn another corner. I return home exactly 45 minutes after I left. Zia is sitting up in bed, waiting. On the souls of all my children, my brother, and my departed sister, this is the first and last time you will take a walk alone. His eyes bulge ferociously. Why, I say. It was fine, see? I don't care. Anywhere you want to go, I'll take you. No, really, I say. You don't have to go out every time I do. Yes, I do. I told your father I would be responsible for you here, and so I am. But my father knows I'm used to going places by myself, I say. Not in Iran, he says. In Iran, a girl does not go out alone. But Haide goes out alone. Well, she's married, he says, exasperated, and she shouldn't go out either. Are you listening? I look to Massey for help. She's American, Massey says quietly. She needs to be alone sometimes. Suddenly, as if a switch has been pulled, Zia's bluster evaporates. He gives me an odd look, recognition perhaps, or incomprehension. Is it that I am American, not of his kind? Or am I doing something he understands, something he himself might have done in my position? Whatever it is, after that day, he doesn't say anything more about my going out, and although Massey still begs me to be careful each time, she gives me my own set of keys. Zia even begins to proudly tell visitors how I insisted on taking a walk alone. She's a very smart girl, he says. I've told her she's not Essie's daughter anymore, she's mine. She goes out all by herself and takes taxis all over the city, with no help from anyone. Really, the visitors say, turning to look at me. Telephone taxis or street taxis? Telephone taxis, I say, not wanting to sound too wild. Although after a week I stopped calling the $2 private cabs that picked me up at home. After a few days in Tehran, $2 seemed like a lot compared to the 10-cent ride I could get in a shared cab. So first tentatively and then aggressively, I began shouting into the windows of orange cabs shooting down the street with 4 or 5 passengers packed inside. Freedom Square, Workers' Avenue. I yell for streets that were once named for kings and princes, and the taxis swing over to let me squeeze in. In shared cabs, strangers complain to each other about everything from the price of meat to the heavy traffic. Sometimes they openly agree that everything is much worse now than in the time of the Shah. Their gripes always center on economics and never on politics, although the two are difficult to separate. No one seems afraid, though, and as they grumble and shake their heads without looking over their shoulders, I wonder if, after all the years of Savak surveillance, they are simply tired of being careful. Or perhaps some of the boldness of the revolution has stuck, and people are no longer as afraid of their neighbors as they once were. In discussions I overhear, some say the new regime is doing more for the people than the Shah did. The villages have electricity now, and the literacy rate is up. With its new parks and freeways, Tehran is greener and less congested than before the revolution. Others argue that those villages were all set to get electricity under the Shah, and that the new regime just plugged them in. Still others point out that at least in education, the mullahs deserve applause, since religious people who would never have sent their daughters to school during the Shah's time are sending them now that they are assured of Islamic curricula and sex segregation. Not only have the schools been reorganized, but recently when I flipped through a copy of Roya's daughter's third-grade reader, I noticed that the books have been altered as well. The primer's main nuclear family has remained intact since the days when I used the book, but all the furniture has disappeared from their house. The girl, Sarah, and their parents now sit on the floor in traditional Iranian style. Their father has gotten rid of his old suits and ties and sports a new Islamic 5 o'clock shadow. Their mother has substituted scarves and cloaks for the perky dresses she used to wear. These mullahs are clever, says a taxi driver who picks me up in South Tehran. The Shah built all those palaces and bought all those cars and jewels, and when he left them all there. But these guys are sweeping up all the money and sending it to bank accounts abroad. If anything ever happens, they'll be ready. They'll just drop their abbas and turbans on the floor and get on a plane with one bag. Outside the cabs, people are just as bold. 300 tumans a kilo? A shriveled grandmother mutters angrily as she scrutinizes the sweet lemons in the grocer's bin. God give these mullahs their deaths before they finish the ruination of this country. I look nervously around the busy shop. Ah, don't worry, she says. I say these things all the time. At my age, what does it matter? And yet, I never hear anyone criticize Khomeini. Even people who complain about the money being spent to plate his huge tomb with gold, but I also sense a lingering reverence for the man who pulled Iran out from under the Shah. Leila Khanum and Roya, who sleep in lacy negligees, watch illegal American videos, and go to women-only fashion shows, also drive around with a tape of Khomeini's speeches in their cassette player. His voice is rich and mellow, and although his sentences are hard for me to understand, his tone is both soothing and provocative. Even without hearing Roya's simplified summary, that people who spend their lives running after material things don't realize that what they're really seeking is God, I can begin to understand how this voice could rouse a nation. And I'll end there and open up for questions if anyone has any. Sorry, go ahead. Well, the question is, why did I name the book To See and See Again? And it's a translation of an Iranian expression, which is Did o Bazdid. And in Iran, it's used to describe the visits that people make almost daily to relatives and friends, and then the relatives and friends come and visit them back, and it's seeing and seeing again is literally what it is. I took that phrase and kind of stretched the meaning to also describe my relationship with Iran, which was, I grew up in Iran seeing it. Anyone else? Yeah. You mean during the time that I went back? I've been back 4 times in the last 5 years, and I've seen good and bad things about the regime, and I think people in Iran also feel that way. I know that probably people who are here have different feelings about it than people who are there doing, and there are definitely a lot of complaints there about restrictions on social life, and the economy right now is not doing well. And, you know, just people wanting more of a democratic system. But I also, the last time I was there was 2 months ago, and people are really very optimistic about the new president. And there's some amazing signs of a move toward a more open society and more of a democratic system, one of which is the press in Iran, which was pretty closed for a long time in terms of, you know, what people could say. And in the last couple of years, it's really taken off. There are about 50 daily newspapers out every day in Tehran, and they have really widely ranging opinions. They argue with each other. They promote one thing or another. Some are pro-Khatami, some are pro-Khamenei, some are both, some are neither. Interestingly, one of the most radical ones is run by a woman who's the daughter of the former president, Rafsanjani. And she runs it's called Women's Newspaper. And it's really very open. They were calling very strongly for the government to go after the killers of the writers and dissidents who were disappearing off the streets and being found dead at that time. The government admitted that the intelligence ministry was behind the killings, and the head of the ministry ended up resigning. Yeah. The question is, what do I think will happen with the status of women? I think the status of women in Iran is probably better than in a lot of Muslim countries, just because they've always had rights in terms of things that people here think, oh, well, in Iran, everyone has to wear a veil over their face, or in Iran, women can't drive, and those things aren't true. There are restrictions in terms of clothing. You have to cover your head with a scarf. You have to wear a long coat. And a lot of people there complain about it, and I think that the fact that they are able to complain, is a good sign, and things are relaxing in that sense. I think more importantly, there are women in very important positions in Iran, and increasingly so. There are women members of parliament, there are lawyers, and some lawyers who are lobbying very hard for changes in laws such as custody laws, which currently favor men, or inheritance laws, which also favor men. So from what I see, I talked to many women journalists in Iran last time I was there, and they were very assertive and doing just everything that their male counterparts were doing. Thank you. Is a compliment. Yes. The question is how other people have responded to the book, and my brother, who is close to me in the book, how he responded, and also how other people who might have had similar experiences. I have had people come to me at readings and say, this is my life. This is, and I love when that happens, because I was hoping that I was writing about more than myself, although it is my story. And also because since I'm half Iranian and half American, that probably gives me a little bit of a different perspective. So it's nice when Iranians come up to me and say, no, this is really how it happened to me too. Of course, everyone's story is different, and there were certain experiences that I didn't go through that I hope other people will write about, because I'd love to see more books about Iran. My brother actually likes the book, so I'm happy about that. And my family has had a good response. I haven't heard from everyone in the family, but my immediate family has been very positive. Yes. And I didn't see or hear about any incidents like that. If I'm not saying it doesn't go on, I don't know everything that goes on in Iran, but I did limit the book to things that I had seen or heard about myself. Yeah. Well, I think there are a lot of messages. I think I tried to kind of say what it's like to leave a country, abruptly, a place that you feel is your homeland, and to come to a new place and adjust, and kind of what the different perspectives are in terms of people who never leave, and people who leave and never go back, and people who want to go back or do go back. And so I think there are a lot of different stories in there, because there are examples of all of that. I think growing up in a half-and-half household, we had to, we didn't talk about everything in front of everyone. And I think that for some of my more conservative and older relatives on my dad's side, we wouldn't tell them that, for example, that if I were dating boys, my dad asked me not to say anything about that. I think that there is a divide between the generations, both here and in Iran. And I think in Iran it comes out very clearly in the political struggles that are going on right now. The younger generation there is very well represented. There's about 60 to 65% of Iranians in Iran are 25 or under. So I think they're going to be a big voice in Iran, and a lot of them voted for Khatami. I think that conflict will probably be going on there and here, and it definitely did for me. Yeah. Can you guys hear me? Okay. No? The question is, can I take the book back to Iran? Someone came up to me at a reading the other night and told me that her aunt actually owns a bookstore in Iran and has my book. So it's there. Yes?
I have a question. How could you say, like, the difference between the girls that grown up in Iran and in the United States? So what do you feel about this, like, the difference?
I don't see that much difference, actually. I know people think of the kids in Iran as being very restrained, and they find ways to lead a life that's probably very similar to young people here. So I don't think it's all that different. I think they're still the same people. Yeah. What generally happens with books that have an interest in Iran, what happens is, since there are no trade relations, they just translate books over there and print them on their own and censor things that they don't want out. So it's not really in my control. I just hope they do a good job. Yes. I'm freelancing right now, just doing a few travel pieces. I did a travel and leisure article about Iran. I went with a group of American tourists in May, one of whom is here tonight, and we traveled around Iran in a bus for a couple of weeks, and then I wrote a pretty big feature article which came out in the Travel and Leisure October issue. So I'm doing stuff like that. Any more questions? Two more. I have some friends who are Kurds. The question is, do I have experience with minorities in Iran? And the answer is I do have several Kurdish friends. I don't have members of every minority represented, but I do know people who are members of minorities. Did you have any in mind? No, not specifically. I think there was more conflict about 10 years ago. I think that's settling down. And the Kurds in Iran, as Kurds everywhere, do want their own homeland, but it's not a violent relationship to the extent that it is in Turkey or Iraq. Yeah, I'm working here now and my family's here, but I would also like the opportunity to live in Iran at some point, if I could find work there and it worked out with what was going on in my life. I really like being over there.